The richest man in the city wore the poorest clothes when he walked into Meridian that rainy evening. Joseph King's tattered coat and worn shoes drew sneers from the elite crowd as crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead. Miranda Cole, the restaurant's owner, exchanged knowing glances with Victor, her head waiter, who approached with rehearsed contempt. "The shelter is 5 blocks east," Victor announced loudly, provoking laughter from nearby tables. Only Melissa, a kind-hearted waitress, showed any decency, as the old black man stood with quiet dignity amid the mockery. They couldn't see the sharp intelligence behind his gentle eyes, or know that this simple act of cruelty would determine their futures. Tomorrow, the same people who laughed would learn exactly who they had humiliated, and by then, it would be far too late. Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. And if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow's special episode is one you definitely don't want to miss. Rain pelted against the windows of Meridian, the most exclusive restaurant in the city. Inside, crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over white tablecloths and polished silverware. The soft murmur of conversation blended with gentle piano music as the city's elite enjoyed their evening meals. Fashion moguls clinked glasses with tech billionaires while celebrities hid behind corner tables, pretending they didn't want to be noticed. Miranda Cole surveyed her domain with cold satisfaction. At 45, she had built Meridian from nothing into the crown jewel of the city's dining scene. Her tailored dress and perfect makeup projected the image she wanted: successful, untouchable, and above all, exclusive. She nodded approvingly at a state senator before moving to greet a famous film director. "The Dover sole is exceptional tonight, James," she said, placing a manicured hand lightly on his shoulder. "Chef has outdone himself." In the service corridor, away from the guest's view, Miranda's smile vanished. "Victor," she called sharply to her head waiter. "Table 7 has been waiting too long for their second course." Victor Thompson straightened, his already impeccable tie. Tall and handsome in a conventional way, his charm was a practiced weapon he wielded with precision. "On it, Ms. Cole." The new server mixed up the tickets. "Fix it," Miranda replied coldly. "And make sure the Watkins party gets the corner booth when they arrive. They spent $6,000 on wine last month." As Victor turned toward the kitchen, he bumped deliberately into Melissa Gray, a waitress in her mid-20s with warm eyes and a quick smile that hadn't yet been extinguished by the restaurant's toxic atmosphere. "Watch where you're going," he snapped, though she had been standing still. Melissa bit back a retort, knowing from experience that Victor's complaints to Miranda could cost her the weekend shifts she desperately needed. Instead, she balanced her tray of appetizers and pushed through the kitchen doors. Inside the kitchen, Chef Lorenzo Bennett worked with focused intensity, his dark hands moving with precision as he added finishing touches to a perfectly seared scallop dish. Unlike the chaos of many high-end kitchens, Lorenzo ran his with quiet authority. Each cook knew their place and role. "Table 12, order up," he called, sliding 2 immaculate plates onto the pass. Lorenzo checked his watch discreetly. 3 more hours until the end of service, then he could call the hospital to check on his daughter Emma. The 8-year-old had been born with a heart defect, and after years of managing with medication, she now needed surgery the family's insurance wouldn't fully cover. The $20,000 gap might as well have been $20 million on a chef's salary. Out in the dining room, the door chimed. The maitre d' looked up, his practiced smile faltering. Standing in the doorway, dripping from the rain, was an elderly black man in tattered clothes. His pants were worn thin at the knees, his sweater had visible holes, and his overcoat might once have been black but had faded to a patchy gray. He carried a plastic bag in one hand and leaned slightly on a simple wooden cane with the other. The maitre d' glanced around nervously, quickly moving to intercept before the unwanted visitor could be noticed by the prestigious clientele. "Sir, I believe you have the wrong address," he said in a low voice. The old man smiled gently. "No, I'm exactly where I intended to be. I'd like a table, please." His voice was surprisingly rich and well-modulated, with perfect diction that contrasted sharply with his appearance. This unexpected dignity momentarily confused the maitre d', whose training hadn't prepared him for homeless-looking people who spoke like professors. By now, several nearby diners had noticed the exchange. Whispers spread through the restaurant, along with uncomfortable glances and raised eyebrows. A woman at the nearest table made a show of covering her nose with a linen napkin. Miranda emerged from her office, immediately assessing the situation. With a slight nod to Victor, she conveyed her command. "Deal with this quickly." Victor approached with exaggerated caution, a mocking smile on his face. "Can I help you?" he asked loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. "The homeless shelter is 5 blocks east. This is a restaurant." The old man regarded Victor calmly. "I'm aware this is a restaurant, that's why I'm here. I'd like a table for one, please." A few diners chuckled. Victor's smile widened. "I'm afraid that's not possible. We have a strict dress code and—" He looked the man up and down with exaggerated disgust. "You clearly don't meet our standards." "I have money to pay," the old man said, reaching into his coat pocket. "Even if you found a 20 on the street, our cheapest entree is $60. Victor smirked. "Now, why don't you shuffle back to whatever cardboard box you call home before I call security?" The laughter grew louder. A young tech CEO at a nearby table held up his phone, clearly recording the exchange for social media. From her position near the bar, Melissa watched with growing discomfort. The old man stood perfectly still, his dignity intact despite the humiliation being heaped upon him. There was something in his eyes, not anger or shame, but a deep, careful observation. He was watching everything, missing nothing. "Sir?" Melissa stepped forward, ignoring Victor's glare. "Would you like me to call you a cab? It's raining pretty hard." The old man turned to her with a gentle smile. "That's kind of you, young lady, but unnecessary. I came here to dine." He turned back to Victor. "And I can afford whatever is on your menu." Victor laughed loudly. "Oh, I'm sure. And I suppose you flew here in your private jet?" "Listen, old-timer, this isn't a soup kitchen. Go bother someone else before you stink up the place." Miranda, deciding the entertainment had gone on long enough, stepped forward. "Victor, please, escort this gentleman out, and maybe give him one of yesterday's rolls for the road." The old man didn't move as Victor approached to take his arm. Instead, he looked directly at Miranda. "Ms. Cole, isn't it? The owner?" Miranda's perfect eyebrows rose in surprise. "You know who I am?" "I make it my business to know about places before I visit them," the old man replied evenly. "Now I understand you're concerned about your establishment's image, but you may want to reconsider how you treat your guests." He glanced around the room at the amused faces of the wealthy diners. Things aren't always what they seem. Something in his tone made Miranda hesitate. Before she could respond, the maitre d' approached, with a concerned expression. "Ms. Cole, the Whitman party has arrived. The senator's wife is with them." Miranda's attention immediately shifted to the important guests. With a dismissive wave toward Victor, she instructed, "Handle this," before gliding toward the entrance. With her professional smile firmly back in place, Victor gripped the old man's arm tightly. "Time to go, Grandpa." The old man didn't resist, but before leaving he caught Melissa's eye. "Kindness is a rare virtue in places built on appearance," he said softly. "Don't lose it." As Victor practically shoved him through the door into the rain, the old man, who had not once raised his voice or lost his composure, disappeared into the wet darkness. The restaurant quickly returned to normal, the incident already becoming an amusing anecdote for the wealthy patrons to share later. Only Melissa stood watching the door, a strange feeling settling in her stomach. Who was this man? And why did she have the unsettling feeling that they hadn't seen the last of him? Morning light streamed through the windows of Miranda's office as she stared at her computer screen, the glow reflecting off her tense face. Despite Meridian's packed reservation book and sky-high prices, the numbers weren't adding up. Food costs had skyrocketed, repairs to the aging kitchen equipment had been unexpectedly expensive, and the rent for the prime location had just increased by 15%. She took a sip of her third espresso of the morning and checked her email again. Still no response from the Harrison Group, the investment firm she'd been courting for months. Without a significant cash infusion, Meridian would be bankrupt within 6 months, a humiliating end to what she'd built through years of calculated networking and ruthless business decisions. The phone on her desk rang. "Ms. Cole, there's a call from Bellevue Hospital regarding Chef Bennett's payment plan," her assistant said. Miranda sighed. "Take a message, and remind Lorenzo that personal calls should be handled on his own time." She returned to the spreadsheets, looking for anything she could cut further. Staff had already been reduced to the minimum. Perhaps they could switch to cheaper suppliers for some ingredients. The customers would never know the difference as long as the presentation remained elegant. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. Victor stood there with his daily report. "The lunch service is covered, but Williams called in sick again," he said, stepping into the office uninvited. "I think he's interviewing at Carson's downtown." Miranda frowned. "Fire him. I don't tolerate disloyalty." "Already done," Victor smirked. "I also switched the schedules so I have Gray's section tonight. The Anderson party tipped 400 last time they were here." "Fine, but make sure she doesn't complain to the other staff. The last thing I need is more talk about tip theft." Victor's smile didn't waver. "She knows better than to say anything. I made that quite clear after the last time." Miranda nodded absently, already returning to her financial problems. "The Harrison Group is sending someone to evaluate us for investment. I need everything perfect when they arrive." "Of course," Victor replied smoothly. "I'll make sure of it. Anyone who doesn't meet standards can join Williams in the unemployment line." Meanwhile, in the quietest corner of the kitchen prep area, Lorenzo Bennett spoke in hushed tones on his cell phone. "Yes, I understand the hospital needs payment before scheduling the surgery." He closed his eyes, pinching the bridge of his nose. "I can have another 3,000 by the end of the week. Please, my daughter's condition is getting worse." The voice on the other end was sympathetically firm. Without at least half of the $20,000 needed for Emma's heart operation, they couldn't schedule the procedure. "I'll figure something out," Lorenzo promised before ending the call. He leaned against the cold steel prep table, momentarily overcome. Emma had been born with a heart defect, but their insurance had labeled the surgery elective rather than emergency. For 3 years, he'd been working double shifts and catering private events on his days off, trying to save enough, but Emma's condition was deteriorating faster than he could save. "Chef?" A sous chef poked his head around the corner. "The fish delivery is here, but it doesn't look fresh." Lorenzo straightened, tucking his personal problems away behind his professional mask. "I'll check it." As he inspected the fish, which was indeed past its prime, Lorenzo made a mental calculation. If he accepted this delivery but negotiated a discount, claiming it was substandard, he could pocket the difference in cost. The thought made him sick, but Emma's pale face flashed in his mind. He'd do anything for her, even compromise his professional standards. "Tell them we'll take it at 60% of the invoice price," he told the delivery man, "and not a penny more." Across the restaurant, in the locker room where servers prepared for their shifts, Melissa Gray carefully counted the tips from her lunch service. $42. Not great, but better than nothing. She added it to the envelope hidden in the lining of her purse, now containing just over $3,000. The letter from the Culinary Institute lay folded at the bottom of her purse. "We are pleased to inform you of your acceptance." But the scholarship had only covered half the tuition. She needed another $5,000 within 6 weeks, or her spot would go to someone on the waiting list. "Counting your pennies." "Again?" Victor's voice made her jump. He stood in the doorway, watching her with his habitual smirk. "Why bother? You'll be stuck serving other people's food forever." Melissa quickly tucked the money away. "Did you need something, Victor?" "Just letting you know I'm taking your section tonight. The Andersons requested me specifically." They both knew it was a lie. The Andersons, like most of the big tippers, had no idea which server they'd had before. Victor simply took the most profitable sections and left the others to fight over the scraps. "But I'm scheduled." "Take it. Up with Miranda if you have a problem," Victor cut her off. "Oh wait, She's the one who approved the change. After he left, Melissa fought back tears of frustration. She needed that section tonight. At the rate Victor was stealing her tables, she'd never save enough in time. The afternoon passed in a blur of preparations for the evening service. Silver was polished, tables were set with precise measurements between each piece of cutlery, fresh flowers were arranged, and wines were brought up from the cellar to breathe. Few of the staff noticed when the old man from the previous night appeared again, this time sitting on a bench across the street, seemingly watching the restaurant. From time to time, he made notes in a small book or spoke briefly into an old flip phone. A young homeless woman approached him, clearly asking for money. Instead of ignoring her or giving her spare change, the old man spoke with her at length. After their conversation, he walked with her to a nearby coffee shop, where they sat talking for nearly an hour. Inside Meridian, Victor happened to glance out the window and spotted the old man. "Look who's back," he sneered to another server. "The old bum from last night, probably hoping for handouts from people leaving the restaurant." "Maybe he's casing the place," the other server suggested. Victor laughed. What's he going to steal? He could barely walk. Probably just some crazy old man with dementia who wandered away from his caretaker. As evening approached, the restaurant began to fill with the dinner crowd. The maitre d' greeted each guest with practiced deference, escorts whisked coats, away to be hung with care, and servers glided between tables with choreographed efficiency. And then, surprising everyone, the old man returned. This time, he had clearly made an effort with his appearance. His clothes, while still old and worn, were cleaner. His white hair was neatly combed, and he had shaved his salt and pepper beard. He carried himself with the same quiet dignity as before. The maitre d' recognized him immediately and signaled to Victor, who approached with a look of disbelief. "You again? Didn't you get the message yesterday? This isn't a place for people like you." The old man met Victor's gaze steadily. "I believe you're legally required to serve any customer who can pay and isn't disturbing others. I'm neither disruptive nor unable to pay." Victor's face darkened. "Listen, old man." "Joseph," the old man interrupted calmly. "My name is Joseph King, but most people call me Old Joe." "I don't care if they call you the King of England," Victor hissed. "You're not welcome here." Miranda appeared beside them, her business smile firmly in place. "Is there a problem?" "This gentleman was just leaving," Victor said pointedly. Joe turned to Miranda. "Ms. Cole, I understand your concern for your establishment's image, but I assure you, I can pay for my meal, and I won't disturb your other guests." Miranda assessed the situation quickly. The restaurant was full, and several patrons were already watching the exchange with interest. Making a scene would be worse for business than seating one oddly dressed old man. "Very well, Mr. King," she said coolly. "Victor will show you to a table." Victor's face registered shock, but he knew better than to contradict Miranda in front of customers. With barely concealed disgust, he led Joe to the worst table in the restaurant, right next to the swinging kitchen doors where servers constantly passed through. "Enjoy the ambiance," Victor said sarcastically, slapping a menu down on the table. Joe settled into his chair with calm dignity. "Thank you. I'm sure I will." As Victor stormed away, Melissa approached the table. "Would you like some water while you look at the menu, Mr. King?" Joe smiled warmly at her. "Yes, thank you, Melissa." She blinked in surprise. "How did you know my name?" "You're wearing a name tag," he replied with a gentle chuckle. "And you were kind to me yesterday when others weren't. I remember that sort of thing." Something about his manner put Melissa at ease. Unlike most customers who barely notice servers except to make demands, Joe looked her in the eye when speaking to her, as if she were a real person worthy of respect. In the kitchen, word spread quickly about the return of the old bum from the night before. Cooks peered through the service window to catch a glimpse of him. $5 says Victor spits in his food, one line cook wagered. 10 says the old guy is gone before the appetizers arrive, another replied. Lorenzo, focused on preparing a complex sauce, paid little attention to the gossip until he heard Victor's voice raised in complaint. "I'm not serving him," Victor insisted. To Miranda, "Make someone else do it." "You'll do your job," Miranda replied firmly. "Just keep him away from the important tables." Lorenzo glanced up in time to see Victor storm past, muttering under his breath about letting in street trash and lowering the standards. Something about the entitled anger in Victor's voice struck a nerve with Lorenzo. He'd been on the receiving end of that tone too many times himself. Out in the dining room, Joe sat calmly observing everything around him. He noted how Victor fawned over wealthy patrons, but snapped at the busboys. He watched Melissa efficiently handle multiple tables, despite being given the least desirable section. He observed Miranda's calculated circuit of the room, spending precisely the right amount of time with each important guest. When Melissa returned to take his order, Joe surprised her by requesting the chef's tasting menu, the most expensive option in the restaurant at $250. "Are you sure?" she asked hesitantly. "It's quite—" "I'm aware of the price," Joe assured her with a smile. "And I'd like the wine pairing as well." Victor, who had been listening nearby, approached with a sneer. "That will be $400 up front. House policy for certain customers." It was a lie, and everyone knew it. But Joe simply reached into his worn coat and produced 4 crisp $100 bills. "Will this be sufficient?" he asked mildly. Victor's smirk faltered momentarily. He snatched the money. "I'll get your first course. Don't make a mess." As the evening progressed, Joe continued to surprise the staff. When the sommelier tried to serve him a cheaper wine than the one listed on the menu, Joe politely identified the substitution and requested the correct bottle. When a famous author at a nearby table quoted a line of poetry, Joe quietly completed the verse and added an insight about the poet's lesser-known works that left the author impressed. In the kitchen, Lorenzo found himself intrigued. When Joe sent compliments specifically to the chef about the balance of acid in the fish course, Lorenzo decided to visit the table himself, something he rarely did. "I wanted to thank you for the kind words about the dish," Lorenzo said, approaching Joe's table. Joe looked up with a warm smile. "Chef Bennett, the pleasure is mine. Your technique with the sauce was impeccable." Lorenzo raised an eyebrow. "You seem to know quite a bit about cooking." "I've had the good fortune to dine in many places," Joe replied. "Though I must say, your flavor combinations are truly original. The hint of fermented black garlic in the beurre blanc was inspired." Lorenzo couldn't hide his surprise. Few diners could identify such a subtle ingredient. "You have a refined palate." "Just an appreciative one," Joe said modestly. "I imagine such talent comes from passion and training. Where did you study?" The question led to a brief but engaging conversation about culinary techniques. As Lorenzo turned to leave, Joe added quietly, "By the way, I couldn't help overhearing earlier. I hope your daughter's health improves soon." Lorenzo froze. He never discussed Emma with customers, or even most staff. "How did you—" "I apologize for the intrusion," Joe said sincerely. "I only mentioned it to say that children are remarkably resilient. With the right care, miracles can happen." Something in the old man's eyes, a depth of understanding and compassion, made Lorenzo's customary protective walls falter. "Thank you," he said simply, before returning to the kitchen. The evening continued, with Joe eating methodically through the tasting menu. In the kitchen, staff continued to speculate about him. "Maybe he won the lottery and is blowing it all before he dies," one suggested. "I think he's some food critic in disguise," offered another. "Nah, probably just some old crazy with a stolen credit card," countered a third. None of them could quite reconcile his shabby appearance with his refined manners and evident knowledge. As Joe finished his meal, he requested the check from Melissa. When she brought it, he studied it carefully, then placed his credit card on the tray. Victor swooped in to take it. "I'll handle this," he told Melissa firmly. When he returned with the receipt, Joe signed it with a steady hand. Victor's eyes widened when he saw the tip, $500 on a $450 bill. Before he could comment, Joe folded the merchant copy and handed it directly to Melissa. "For your excellent service," he said with a meaningful look. As Joe prepared to leave, he paused beside Victor, who was still staring at the receipt in disbelief. "Young man," Joe said quietly, "I'd like to share something with you. The way a man treats those he thinks can do nothing for him says everything about his character." The words landed with unexpected weight. Victor opened his mouth for a retort, but for once no clever insult came to mind. Joe nodded politely to Miranda on his way out, thanked the maitre d', and disappeared into the night, leaving behind a restaurant full of confused and curious people, and one server clutching a $500 tip that might just help her dream stay alive. Later that night, after closing, Melissa sat in her small apartment with her laptop open. Something about the old man's parting words to Victor had struck her as familiar. On a whim, she typed the quote into a search engine. The results made her breath catch. The words were attributed to Joseph King Sr., a notoriously private billionaire, philanthropist known for his ethical business practices and generous anonymous giving. There wasn't much information about him. He avoided publicity and had rarely been photographed in the last decade. But the few images she found from his younger years showed a handsome black man with the same distinctive eyes as old Joe. "It couldn't be," Melissa whispered to herself. But the more she read about Joseph King Sr. and his foundation, the more the pieces seemed to fit. The King Foundation was known for anonymous giving, focusing on medical care for children, educational opportunities for promising students from disadvantaged backgrounds, and investments in ethical businesses. As Melissa dug deeper into articles about Joseph King Sr.'s business philosophy, one quote stood out: "I never invest in any business until I've seen how they treat their least powerful customers and their most vulnerable employees. Character reveals itself when no one important is watching." With growing excitement and trepidation, Melissa realized that Meridian and everyone in it might be undergoing a test they didn't know they were taking. And so far, most of them were failing spectacularly. Joe's return to Meridian the following evening caught no one by surprise. The staff had been speculating all day about whether the peculiar old man would make another appearance. Victor had even made bets with the bartenders about how quickly Miranda would throw him out this time. But when Joe walked through the door, something was different. Though his clothes remained humble, they were notably cleaner. His posture seemed straighter, his presence somehow more commanding despite his unassuming appearance. The maitre d' approached with considerably more respect than the previous night. "Good evening, Mr. King. Would you prefer the same table as yesterday?" "That would be fine, Thomas," Joe replied, using the maitre d's name though the man wasn't wearing a visible name tag. Victor watched the exchange from across the room, his face darkening. The $500 tip from the previous night still rankled him. Money. That should have been his in his estimation. Tonight he'd make sure to handle the old man's table personally. "I'll take care of Mr. King," Victor announced, stepping forward with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Joe nodded pleasantly as Victor led him to the same table by the kitchen door. The constant swinging of the door and the noise from the kitchen made it the least desirable spot in the restaurant, but Joe settled in without complaint. "Our specials tonight are overpriced for what they are," Victor said with barely disguised contempt. "But I'm sure that won't bother someone like you who clearly has money to burn." "I appreciate the candor," Joe replied calmly. "However, I think I'll trust Chef Bennett's recommendations again. The tasting menu was excellent yesterday." Victor's smile tightened. "Coming right up. I assume you can pay cash again?" Joe reached into his worn coat pocket and pulled out a small, leather card holder. He extracted several $100 bills and placed them on the table. "Will this be sufficient for tonight's meal and wine pairings?" The casual display of cash momentarily threw Victor off balance. "I'll get your first course," he muttered, turning sharply away. At the bar, Victor complained to the bartender. "Something's not right about that old man. Nobody dressed like that carries that kind of cash unless they're into something illegal." The bartender shrugged. "Who cares as long as he tips well? Maybe he's one of those eccentric millionaires you read about." "Please," Victor scoffed. He's probably some retired janitor spending his entire life savings to pretend he belongs here. When the sommelier brought Joe's first wine pairing, a crisp Sancerre to accompany his amuse-bouche, Joe took a thoughtful sip before frowning slightly. "I believe there's been a mistake," he said gently. "This is a lovely wine, but it's not the Domaine Vacheron you've listed on your pairing menu." The sommelier's eyes widened. "Sir, I assure you, it's a Pascal Jolivet," Joe continued unperturbed. "Excellent in its own right, but with a distinctly different mineral profile than the Vacheron. Perhaps you've run out of the Vacheron." The sommelier glanced nervously at Victor, who had instructed him to serve the cheaper wine. I'll check the cellar, sir." As the flustered sommelier retreated, Joe's attention was drawn to a nearby table where a well-known literary critic was dining with a publisher. They were discussing a recent poetry collection, and the critic quoted several lines from Keats. "Beauty is truth, truth beauty. That is all ye know on earth and all ye need to know," the critic recited. From his table, Joe softly completed the quote. "Beauty is truth, truth beauty. That is all ye know on earth and all ye need to know." "The you ought?" Critic turned in surprise. "You know Keats?" "One of my favorites," Joe replied with a warm smile. "Though his Ode on Melancholy speaks to me more deeply as I've aged. Aye, in the very temple of delight, veiled melancholy has her sovereign shrine." The critic's eyebrows rose in genuine surprise. Not many people appreciate his more complex works. He studied Joe with new interest, clearly reassessing his initial impression based on Joe's appearance. Perhaps because few have experienced enough of life's contrasts to truly understand them, Joe suggested. This exchange did not go unnoticed by other diners or the staff. Miranda, making her usual rounds, paused to observe the unexpected conversation between her shabby customer and one of the city's most respected cultural voices. Meanwhile, Melissa had been watching Joe from a distance. After her internet research the previous night, she couldn't help wondering if this humble old man might truly be the reclusive billionaire Joseph King Sr. When Victor was called away to handle a complaint at another table, Melissa seized the opportunity to approach Joe. "How is everything tonight, Mr. King?" she asked, refilling his water glass. "Excellent, thank you, Melissa," Joe replied, "though I sense you have a question beyond the quality of the food." Melissa hesitated, then gathered her courage. "I hope this isn't too forward, but I couldn't help noticing your insight about character yesterday. It reminded me of something I once read." A subtle smile played at the corners of Joe's mouth. "Did it now? And what might that have been?" "A quote from Joseph King Sr., Melissa said, watching his reaction carefully, "about how people reveal their true character through how they treat those they believe can do nothing for them." Joe's eyes twinkled, but he neither confirmed nor denied the connection. "Sounds like a wise perspective, regardless of who said it. Tell me, Melissa, if you weren't serving tables here, what would you be doing?" The sudden change of subject caught her off guard. Well, I've been accepted to the Culinary Institute, but I'm still short on tuition." "And what draws you to cooking?" As Melissa shared her passion for creating food that brought comfort and joy to others, she found herself opening up more than she'd intended. Joe listened attentively, asking thoughtful questions that showed genuine interest in her dreams. "You have a gift for seeing possibilities where others see only ingredients," Joe observed. "That's rare and valuable." Before Melissa could respond, Victor returned, inserting himself between them. "Don't you have other tables to attend to?" he said sharply to Melissa. "Of course," she replied, stepping back. "Enjoy your meal, Mr. King." As the evening progressed, Joe continued to surprise the staff with his extensive knowledge of food, wine, and culture. When his main course arrived, a perfectly cooked duck breast with cherry reduction, he complimented the balance of flavors, so specifically that Chef Lorenzo was summoned from the kitchen once again. "You mentioned utilizing black garlic yesterday," Joe said when Lorenzo approached his table. "May I ask where you source it? The fermentation process creates such unique complexity." Lorenzo found himself engaged in a detailed conversation about ingredient sourcing and fermentation techniques. Joe spoke with the authority of someone who had spent years in professional kitchens, yet there was nothing pretentious in his manner. "You know," Joe said thoughtfully as their conversation wound down, "I've always believed that cooking is one of the purest expressions of care we can offer others. Your passion for your craft is evident in every dish." Lorenzo nodded, unexpectedly, moved by the simple acknowledgement. "Thank you. That means more than you might know." As Joe prepared to leave after finishing his meal, he requested his check from Victor, who brought it with barely concealed resentment. Once again, Joe left a substantial tip, this time an even $1,000. But instead of giving the entire tip to Melissa as he had the night before, he divided it, placing half in an envelope with Lorenzo's name written on it. "Would you ensure Chef Bennett receives this?" Joe asked Victor. A small token of appreciation for an exceptional meal. Victor stared at the envelope. "We're not supposed to accept gifts from customers." "I believe there's an exception for gratuities," Joe replied calmly, "and I would consider it a personal favor." Something in Joe's tone made it clear that refusing wasn't an option. Victor reluctantly took the envelope, though Melissa, watching from nearby, suspected it might never reach Lorenzo's hands. As Joe rose to leave, he paused beside Victor. "Young man, I've been observing you these past evenings." Victor straightened defensively. "And? You have potential that you're squandering through unkindness," Joe said simply. "Life has a way of reflecting back what we put into it. Remember that." Before Victor could form a retort, Joe turned to speak quietly with Melissa. "Don't give up on your dreams," he told her. "Sometimes help comes from unexpected places." With that, Joe left the restaurant, leaving behind a trail of confusion, speculation, and for a few staff members, a glimmer of hope. Later that night, after closing, Victor was counting his tips when Melissa approached him. "Did you give Lorenzo the envelope?" Victor's eyes narrowed. "Mind your own business." "That money wasn't meant for you," Melissa persisted. "It was specifically for Lorenzo." "Says who? That senile old man? For all we know, he's some con artist or lunatic." Melissa took a deep breath. "I don't think so. I think he might be Joseph King Sr." Victor burst out laughing. "The billionaire? Are you insane? That old bum?" "I looked him up last night," Melissa explained. "The King Foundation is known for testing businesses by sending representatives in disguise. And that quote he mentioned, it's directly attributed to Joseph King Sr. in several interviews." "You've been watching too many movies," Victor scoffed. "Next you'll tell me he's secretly a prince in disguise." But despite his dismissive words, doubt flickered across Victor's face. He'd noticed the old man's refined speech, his extensive knowledge, the way he carried himself with quiet authority, and those cash tips. Meanwhile, in his office, Lorenzo found a business card that had been slipped under his door. It contained only a phone number and the words, "King Foundation, Children's Medical Fund." With trembling hands, he dialed the number, barely daring to hope. Morning light filtered through the windows of Melissa's small apartment as she hunched over her laptop, surrounded by printouts of articles and notes. She'd been up half the night researching Joseph King Sr. and his foundation after her shift ended. The more she discovered, the more convinced she became that old Joe was indeed the reclusive billionaire. The King Foundation, established 30 years ago, operated unlike typical charitable organizations. It deliberately maintained a low profile, giving anonymously and often through unconventional channels. Several articles mentioned the foundation's unusual approach to vetting potential recipients, sending representatives in disguise to observe character and operations before committing funds. One business owner in Detroit described how an elderly custodian had frequented his struggling community bakery for weeks before revealing himself as a representative of the King Foundation and offering a substantial investment. A children's hospital in Chicago reported a similar story about a shabby but kind visitor who turned out to be connected to the foundation's medical funding program. Melissa printed a grainy photo from a decade-old news clipping. It showed a younger Joseph King Sr. at a rare public appearance. Though the man in the photo was in his 60s rather than his 80s, The distinctive eyes and facial structure matched old Joe's. She pinned it to her corkboard alongside other clippings and notes. "It has to be him," she murmured to herself. But why Meridian? The restaurant wasn't exactly a charity case. It was one of the most exclusive dining establishments in the city. Then again, with Miranda's obvious financial worries and Lorenzo's situation, Melissa's phone buzzed with a text from a coworker. "Meeting called before shift today. Mandatory. Big announcement." When Melissa arrived at the restaurant 2 hours before opening, she found the entire staff gathered in the dining room. Miranda stood at the front, looking more polished and excited than usual. "I have important news," Miranda announced once everyone had arrived. "Tomorrow night we'll be hosting representatives from the Harrison Group, one of the largest investment firms in the country. They're considering a significant partnership with Meridian that would secure our future and expand our brand nationwide." Ayo. Murmur of interest rippled through the staff. "This is the opportunity we've been waiting for," Miranda continued. "Everything must be perfect. Victor will be coordinating service. Chef Bennett will present a special menu. Anyone who doesn't perform to standard will be terminated immediately. Is that clear?" The staff nodded soberly, understanding the stakes. Saluo. The meeting dispersed. Victor pulled aside the senior servers. "I'll be handling the Harrison table personally," he informed them. "They'll be in the private dining room. Miranda wants our most prestigious regular clients seated nearby to create the right atmosphere." Melissa started to return to her prep work when Lorenzo caught her eye, gesturing subtly for her to join him in the kitchen. "Did you give that old man, Joe, your number?" Lorenzo asked once they were alone. Melissa shook her head. "No, why?" Lorenzo glanced around to ensure they weren't overheard. "Someone left a card under my office door last night with the King Foundation's contact information. I called this morning." He took a deep breath. "They've approved full funding for Emma's surgery. She's scheduled for next Tuesday with one of the top cardiac surgeons in the country." Melissa's eyes widened. "Lorenzo, that's amazing. But how?" "They said an anonymous donor recommended my case," Lorenzo continued, his voice thick with emotion. "Said they'd been monitoring Emma's situation and were just waiting for the right time to step in." "It's him," Melissa whispered. "Joe is connected to the King Foundation. I've been researching all night. Joseph King Sr. is known for testing people and businesses before investing or giving." Lorenzo shook his head in disbelief. But why would a billionaire philanthropist be eating in restaurants dressed like that? And why Meridian specifically? Before Melissa could answer, the kitchen doors swung open and Victor entered. "What are you two whispering about? We have work to do." They separated quickly, but Victor's suspicious gaze followed them for the rest of the preparation shift. That evening, Melissa was stationed near the entrance when she spotted Joe approaching the restaurant. He was dressed slightly better tonight, still humble clothing, but with a clean button-up shirt replacing his usual worn sweater. She tried to catch his eye as he entered, but the maitre d' immediately escorted him to a table in Victor's section. Throughout the evening, Melissa found reasons to pass near Joe's table, hoping for a moment to speak with him. She noticed he wasn't ordering the elaborate tasting menu tonight, but instead sat nursing a single glass of wine and observing the restaurant operations with quiet attention. During a brief lull, Melissa finally managed to approach. "Good evening, Mr. King. Can I get you anything else?" Joe smiled warmly. "Just some company for a moment if you can spare it." Melissa glanced around to make sure Victor wasn't watching, then slid into the chair opposite Joe. "I wanted to thank you," she said in a low voice, "for what you did for Lorenzo's daughter." Joe's expression revealed nothing. "I'm not sure what you mean." "The King Foundation," Melissa pressed. "Emma's surgery, that was you, wasn't it?" A hint of a smile played at the corners of Joe's mouth. "The foundation helps many children in need. I'm glad to hear Emma will receive the care she requires." "I know who you are," Melissa said, meeting his gaze directly. "You're Joseph King Sr. You're testing us, the restaurant, the staff, Miranda." Joe neither confirmed nor denied her assertion. Instead, he asked, "And what do you think such a test would reveal, Melissa?" She hesitated, then admitted, Nothing good for the most part. Victor is cruel and dishonest. Miranda cares only about appearances and profit. The whole place runs on fear and exploitation. Not entirely, Joe observed. There's you and Lorenzo, people with integrity despite difficult circumstances. Their conversation was interrupted by Victor's sudden appearance. Socializing on the clock, Melissa? I'm sure Miranda would be interested to know how you spend your time during service. Melissa quickly stood. Mr. King needed assistance with the wine list. I'll handle it, Victor said tersely. You're needed in Section 3. As Melissa reluctantly left, she heard Victor's tone change to one of calculated charm. Now, Mr. King, what can I help you with this evening? Joe's response was too quiet for her to hear, but from Victor's expression, it wasn't what he expected. Later, that evening, Joe struck up a conversation with Lorenzo, who had emerged from the kitchen to speak with a regular customer. When Lorenzo stopped by Joe's table, their discussion quickly turned personal. I understand congratulations are in order, Joe said quietly. Emma's operation is scheduled, I hear. Lorenzo's eyes widened. How did you? News travels, Joe replied with a gentle smile. I imagine you're feeling both relieved and anxious. Lorenzo nodded, suddenly finding himself sharing his fears and hopes for his daughter's future with this strange old man who somehow inspired trust. Joe listened attentively, occasionally offering insights that suggested personal experience with similar situations. You know, Joe said thoughtfully, as their conversation wound down. I've always believed that a person's true calling reveals itself in moments of crisis. Your dedication to your daughter speaks volumes about your character, Chef Bennett. Thank you, Lorenzo replied, genuinely moved. That means a lot. Have you ever considered what you might do if you weren't constrained by circumstances? Joe asked. If you could create any kind of restaurant or food experience, what would it be? The question caught Lorenzo off guard, but he found himself describing a long-held dream. A community-focused restaurant that would offer high-quality food at accessible prices, with a training program for aspiring chefs from disadvantaged backgrounds. Joe listened intently, occasionally asking insightful questions that helped Lorenzo articulate his vision more clearly. By the time they finished talking, Lorenzo had shared more of his personal dreams than he had with anyone in years. As the evening wound down, Miranda made her usual rounds of the dining room, stopping briefly at Joe's table. Her attitude toward him had evolved from disdain to cautious curiosity after witnessing his interactions with the literary critic and other respected patrons. I hope everything has been satisfactory, Mr. King, she said with her professional smile. The food was excellent as always, Joe replied. Chef Bennett is quite talented. Yes, we're fortunate to have him, Miranda agreed smoothly. Though between us, his background is somewhat unconventional for an establishment of this caliber. Joe's expression remained pleasant, but something in his eyes hardened slightly. I've found that true talent often emerges from unexpected places, Ms. Cole. The trick is recognizing it rather than being distracted by packaging. The subtle rebuke wasn't lost on Miranda, whose smile faltered momentarily. Of course, will we be seeing you tomorrow evening? We're hosting a special event. I wouldn't miss it, Joe assured her. After Joe left, Victor cornered Melissa in the service area. What did you tell that old man about me? Nothing, Melissa replied truthfully. He was asking questions about how tips are distributed and how long I've worked here, Victor said, his voice tight with suspicion. What game are you playing? I'm not playing any game, Melissa insisted. Maybe he's just curious. Victor leaned closer, his voice dropping to a threatening whisper. Listen carefully. That Harrison group meeting tomorrow is my ticket out of this place and into something bigger. If you do anything to mess that up, I'll make sure you never work in a decent restaurant again, understand? Melissa nodded silently, but as Victor walked away, a plan began forming in her mind. She needed proof of Joe's identity, something concrete enough to convince Lorenzo and possibly protect herself from Victor's inevitable retaliation when the truth came out. That night, Melissa visited the King Foundation's website on her laptop. There was no direct contact information, but there was a general inquiry form. Taking a deep breath, she typed, "Is Joseph King Sr. currently evaluating Meridian restaurant? Please tell him Melissa Gray would like to speak with him about his experience." There. It was a shot in the dark, but she had to try. After hitting send, she continued her research, eventually discovering an archived newspaper photograph from 15 years ago showing a younger Joseph King Sr. at a charity event. Though the man in the photo was in his 60s rather than his 80s, the distinctive eyes, nose, and jawline matched old Joe exactly. "It really is him," Melissa whispered to herself, printing the photo and adding it to her growing collection of evidence. The next morning, Melissa woke to an email notification on her phone. The message was brief. "Ms. Gray, your inquiry has been received. Mr. King suggests you observe carefully this evening. Sometimes the most revealing moments occur under pressure. King Foundation." Melissa stared at the message, her heart racing. This was the confirmation she'd been seeking. Now she just needed to decide what to do with it. Meanwhile, at Meridian, Miranda was directing staff in preparations for the evening's all-important dinner with the Harrison group. The private dining room was being meticulously arranged. The wine cellar's finest bottles were being brought up, and Chef Lorenzo was preparing to showcase his most impressive dishes. What no one realized was that another party was making preparations as well. On the other side of the city, in a luxurious office suite, Joseph King Sr., dressed in an impeccable suit that bore no resemblance to old Joe's humble attire, was briefing his team. "Tonight," he told them, "we'll see exactly what kind of establishment Ms. Cole is running, and then we'll decide whether it deserves to continue operating at all." Meridian glittered like a jewel that evening. Extra chandeliers had been brought, in casting a golden glow over the dining room. The finest linens draped the tables, and arrangements of exotic flowers perfumed the air. Staff members moved with heightened precision, acutely aware of Miranda's eyes tracking their every move. Atelier. Her office, Miranda applied another coat of lipstick, scrutinizing her reflection. Tonight would determine Meridian's future, and her own. The Harrison Group representatives were due to arrive in less than an hour. If they agreed to invest, her financial troubles would vanish overnight. If not, she pushed the thought away. Failure wasn't an option. "Ms. Cole?" Victor knocked on her open door. "Everything is ready. The private dining room is prepared, and Chef Bennett's menu has been approved." "And the guest list?" "All confirmed." "Yes. We have 3 city council members, that tech CEO from Silicon Valley, and several social media influencers strategically seated near the private room. The Harrison party will see that we cater to the right clientele." Miranda nodded approvingly. "Perfect. What about the press?" "Food critic from the Tribune is at table 9. The lifestyle blogger is at 11. Both have been given complimentary champagne." "Excellent." Miranda smoothed her dress. "This has to be flawless, Victor. I've staked everything on tonight." "I understand." Victor hesitated. "There's one small issue. That old man, Joe. He's made another reservation." Miranda's expression darkened. "Cancel it." "I tried. He insisted. And after the way he's been tipping, the staff is eager to serve him." "Fine. Put him somewhere out of sight, far from the Harrison party, and make sure he doesn't cause any disruption." As Victor left, Miranda reached for the vodka bottle in her desk drawer. One quick shot to steady her nerves. Tonight would change. Everything. She couldn't allow any distractions. Meanwhile, in the kitchen, Lorenzo worked with focused intensity. His hands moved with practiced precision as he prepared elements for the evening's special menu. But his mind was elsewhere, with Emma, who would finally receive her life-saving surgery next week thanks to the mysterious King Foundation. "Chef?" Melissa approached cautiously. "Do you have a moment?" Lorenzo glanced up. "Make it quick. We're on a tight schedule. It's about Joe, the old man who's been coming in. I have proof of who he really is." She slid a folder across the counter. "He's Joseph King Sr., the billionaire philanthropist who runs the King Foundation." Lorenzo stared at the newspaper clippings and photos. The younger man in the grainy photographs shared the same distinctive features as their elderly customer. "This can't be right. Why would someone like him come here dressed like that? The foundation is known for testing businesses before investing. They send representatives, or King himself, in disguise to observe how people behave when they don't know who they're serving. Lorenzo's face paled. And we've been seating him by the kitchen door. Worse, Melissa continued urgently. Victor has been openly hostile to him, and Miranda has treated him like an inconvenience. Tonight could be our last chance to make things right. The Harrison Group meeting. What if it's actually connected to the King Foundation? Before Lorenzo could respond, the kitchen doors swung open and Victor entered. What are you two whispering about? Melissa, you should be on the floor. We open in 15 minutes. As Melissa hurried away, Victor's gaze fell on the folder Lorenzo was hastily closing. What's that? Nothing, just some recipe ideas. Lorenzo tucked the folder under his arm, but not before Victor glimpsed a photo of Joe. Why do you have pictures of that old bum? Victor demanded. He's not a bum, Lorenzo replied evenly. And you might want to show him some respect tonight. Victor's eyes narrowed. What's that supposed to mean? Just a suggestion. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a menu to prepare. The evening service began with the practice choreography of high-end dining. Guests arrived to be greeted by name, coats were whisked away, and champagne appeared as if by magic. Miranda circulated among the early arrivals, her social smile firmly in place. At precisely 7 o'clock, Joe arrived. Unlike previous visits, there was something subtly different about him tonight. Though his clothes remained humble, he carried himself with an unmistakable air of authority. The maitre d', noticing the change, escorted him to his table with newfound deference. Victor intercepted them. Mr. King, your usual table isn't available tonight. We have a special event. I'll need to seat you in the back corner. Joe smiled, mildly. That won't be necessary, Victor. My usual table will be fine. Something in Joe's tone made Victor hesitate. For the first time he sensed something beneath the old man's shabby exterior, a quiet power that couldn't be dismissed. We're fully booked with VIP guests, Victor insisted, regaining his composure. The table by the kitchen is unavailable. Joe glanced around the dining room, noting several empty tables, including his usual spot. I see. And these VIP guests? They're more important than other paying customers? For tonight, yes, Victor replied bluntly. Some people matter more than others, that's just reality. Joe's expression remained pleasant, but his eyes grew serious. An interesting perspective. Tell me, does Ms. Cole share this view of customer value? It's company policy, Victor said firmly. Now, if you'll follow me to the back corner, Joe nodded thoughtfully but didn't move. Before we proceed, I'd like to speak with Melissa. She's been most helpful during my previous visits. Victor's face darkened. Melissa is assigned to other tables tonight. I'll be handling your service personally. Nevertheless, I'd like to speak with her. The simple request, delivered without heat but with unmistakable authority, left Victor momentarily speechless. He was saved from responding by the arrival of 3 black SUVs outside the restaurant. The Harrison Group representatives had arrived. If you'll excuse me, Victor said tersely, I have important guests to attend to. Follow me to your table or leave. Those are your options. As Victor walked away, Joe remained where he stood, watching, with quiet interest as Miranda rushed to greet the new arrivals. The first 2 were clearly executives in expensive suits, but it was the third person who drew everyone's attention, a distinguished-looking older woman who carried herself with natural authority. Mrs. Harrison, Miranda gushed, it's an honor to welcome you to Meridian. We've prepared our finest table and a special menu for your party. Margaret Harrison, head of the Harrison Group, nodded politely, but seemed distracted, her gaze sweeping the restaurant as if looking for someone. When her eyes fell on Joe standing near the entrance, a flash of recognition crossed her face. Miranda, following her gaze, felt a stab of anxiety. I apologize for that, gentleman. He's being seated elsewhere. He won't disturb your evening. No need to apologize, Mrs. Harrison replied smoothly. Actually, I'd like to meet him. Who is he? Miranda blinked in confusion. Just a regular customer, nothing special. Bring him to our table, Mrs. Harrison instructed. I insist." As Miranda signaled frantically to Victor, who looked equally confused, Joe made his way calmly toward the Harrison party. "Margaret," he greeted the older woman with warm familiarity. "Right on time as always." "Joseph," she replied with a smile, "I see you're conducting business as usual." The blood drained from Miranda's face as realization dawned. "Joseph, as in?" Joe turned to her with the same mild expression he'd maintained throughout his visits. "Joseph King, yes. Mrs. Harrison and I are old friends. Her investment group, often partners with my foundation." The restaurant fell silent as guests and staff alike realized what was happening. Victor, who had rushed over at Miranda's signal, stood frozen, his expression shifting from confusion to horror. "Perhaps," Joe suggested gently, "we should move this conversation to the private dining room you've prepared. I believe we have matters to discuss that might be better handled away from an audience." Miranda nodded numbly, leading the way with leaden steps. As they walked, she whispered urgently to Victor, "Why didn't you recognize him? How could you let this happen?" "Me," Victor hissed back. "You're the one who told me to treat him like garbage." In the kitchen, Melissa hurried to find Lorenzo. "It's happening," she whispered urgently. "Joe just revealed himself to Miranda and the Harrison people. They've gone to the private dining room." Lorenzo's eyes widened. "And Victor? Looks like he's seen a ghost. He and Miranda are panicking." "Good," Lorenzo said with quiet satisfaction. "Maybe they'll finally understand what they've done." In the private dining room, Miranda struggled to regain her composure as she faced Joseph King Sr. No longer old Joe in her mind, but one of the wealthiest and most influential philanthropists in the country. "Mr. King," she began, her voice unnaturally high, "I can't express how honored we are to have you dining with us. Had we known who you were—" "That's precisely the point, Ms. Cole," Joe interrupted gently. "I wanted to experience Meridian as any customer would, not as someone deemed important." Margaret Harrison nodded in agreement. "Joseph's methods may seem unconventional, but they're remarkably effective at revealing an establishment's true culture." Miranda forced a laugh. "I assure you, we treat all our guests with the utmost respect." "Do you?" Joe asked mildly. "That hasn't been my experience." "There must be some misunderstanding," Miranda insisted, shooting a venomous glance at Victor. "Perhaps my staff failed to properly—" "Your staff," Joe interrupted again, "reflects your leadership, Ms. Cole. Victor's behavior isn't an anomaly. It's a symptom of the culture you've created." The private dining room door opened, and the maitre D poked his head in. "Ms. Cole, there's a situation in the kitchen that requires your attention." "Not now," Miranda snapped. "It's Chef Bennett," the maitre d' persisted. "He's demanding to speak with Mr. King immediately." Before Miranda could object further, Joe nodded. "Send him in, please." Lorenzo entered, still wearing his chef's coat, his expression a mixture of determination and hope. "Mr. King, I need to thank you properly. What you've done for Emma, I can never repay you." Joe waved away his thanks. "No repayment necessary. Chef Bennett, your daughter deserves the best care available." "What is this about?" Miranda demanded. "The King Foundation is funding Emma's heart surgery," Lorenzo explained, his voice thick with emotion. "She's seeing one of the top specialists in the country next week." Joe nodded. Lorenzo's dedication to his craft despite his personal struggles impressed me. He puts his heart into every dish, even when those he serves don't appreciate his efforts. The implied criticism wasn't lost on Miranda, whose face flushed with anger. Before she could respond, Victor stepped forward, his mask of arrogance replaced by desperate charm. "Mr. King, if there have been any misunderstandings during your visits, I take full responsibility. Had I known who you were—" "That's exactly the problem," Joe interrupted, his voice suddenly stern. "You believed it necessary to know my status before deciding how to treat me with basic human dignity." The private dining room door opened again, and Melissa entered tentatively. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but Ms. Gray," Joe greeted her warmly, "please join us. We were just discussing Meridian's approach to customer service." Miranda's eyes darted between Melissa and Joe, noting their familiar interaction. You two know each other? Melissa was the only person who showed me consistent kindness during my visits, Joe explained, regardless of my appearance or perceived status. Victor's face darkened with rage. You put her up to this. She knew who you were all along. No, Melissa replied firmly. I figured it out on my own after seeing how Mr. King was treated. Unlike some people, I pay attention to character, not clothing. The tension in the room was palpable as Victor took a threatening step toward Melissa. That's enough, Joe's voice cut through the room like steel. Though he hadn't raised his volume, the authority in his tone stopped Victor instantly. Your behavior right now only confirms what I've observed over the past 3 evenings. Joe turned to address Margaret Harrison. Margaret, I believe we've seen enough to make our decision. Mrs. Harrison nodded gravely. Indeed we have, Joseph. Miranda, sensing her opportunity slipping away, made one last desperate attempt. Mr. King, Mrs. Harrison, please. Whatever impressions you've formed, I assure you they don't reflect Meridian's true values. If you'll give us another chance to show you. I've had 3 chances, Ms. Cole, Joe replied evenly. Each night I watched how you and your staff operate. I saw how you treat those you deem important versus those you don't. I observed the fear you instill in your employees, the corners you cut with food quality, and the toxic culture you've created. Miranda's professional facade crumbled completely. This isn't fair. You came in looking like a homeless person. What did you expect? Basic human decency, Joe answered simply. The same courtesy you'd show anyone. The room fell silent as the impact of his words sank in. In that moment, Victor's face contorted with a final surge of anger and resentment. This is ridiculous, he snarled. You come in here looking like some bum off the street, and we're supposed to treat you like royalty? I've worked too hard to be lectured by some self-righteous old black man playing dress-up games. A collective gasp filled the room at Victor's openly racist comment. Even Miranda looked shocked at the outburst. Joe regarded Victor calmly. And there it is, the truth beneath the surface. Thank you for making my point so effectively. The tension in the private dining room was broken by the arrival of 6 professionally dressed individuals who entered without knocking. They moved, with the coordinated precision of a team accustomed to working together, each carrying tablets and phones. Mr. King, the leader addressed Joe. The cars are ready whenever you are. The mayor sends his regrets that he couldn't join tonight as planned. Joe nodded in acknowledgement before turning back to the stunned faces of Miranda and Victor. With deliberate movements, he removed his worn overcoat to reveal an impeccably tailored suit jacket underneath. From an inner pocket, he withdrew a pair of designer glasses which he put on with practiced ease. In seconds, his entire demeanor transformed. His posture straightened, his movements became more refined, and the full force of his authority filled the room. Joseph King Sr., chairman of the King Foundation and CEO of King Enterprises, he introduced himself formally. Though I believe we've already been acquainted over the past few evenings. The shock on Miranda's face would have been comical under different circumstances. Victor had gone completely pale, his earlier bravado evaporated. But why? Miranda managed to ask. Why come to Meridian like that? I never invest in any business without seeing its true character first, Joe explained. The way an establishment treats its least powerful customers tells me everything I need to know about its values. One of Joe's assistants stepped forward, handing him a leather portfolio. The documentation you requested, sir. Joe opened the folder and scanned its contents. As of 9 o'clock this morning, King Hospitality Group acquired a controlling 51% stake in Meridian's parent company, Prestige Dining Concepts. Miranda gasped. That's impossible. PDC isn't for sale. Every company has its price, Mrs. Harrison interjected smoothly, especially those facing bankruptcy. Your parent company was quite eager to divest individual properties that were underperforming. Financially. Underperforming? Miranda sputtered. Meridian is the flagship restaurant of the entire group. In reputation, perhaps, Joe acknowledged. But according to the financial records we reviewed, Meridian has been operating at a loss for nearly 2 years. Your cost-cutting measures, inferior ingredients, reduced staff, unreported cash transactions, have eroded both quality and integrity. Miranda's face drained of color as she realized the extent of Joe's knowledge about her business practices. Joe continued, his voice level but resolute. I came here prepared to offer a substantial investment to revitalize Meridian, if it proved worthy. I was evaluating not just the food or service, but the character of the establishment. He turned to where Melissa and Lorenzo stood watching the scene unfold. I found that character in certain individuals, but not in the leadership. Victor, desperate to salvage something from the disaster, stepped forward with an ingratiating smile. Mr. King, I deeply regret any misunderstanding. If you'll allow me to explain my approach to customer service. There's nothing to explain, Joe interrupted firmly. Your behavior speaks for itself, particularly your final comments, which revealed exactly what drives your treatment of others. He gestured to one of his assistants, who handed Victor an envelope. Your employment is terminated, effective immediately. This contains severance equal to 2 weeks' pay, which is more generous than what you've offered to the staff members you fired on Ms. Cole's behalf. Victor stared at the envelope in disbelief. You can't fire me. You don't have the authority. As majority shareholder, I'm afraid I do, Joe corrected him. The severance is a courtesy, not an obligation, given the documented history of your conduct. Another assistant stepped forward, projecting documentation onto the wall of the private dining room, video clips of Victor's behavior over previous evenings, records of tip theft, and testimonials from former employees about his abusive practices. How did you get this? Victor demanded, his voice rising in panic. We've been monitoring Meridian for weeks, Joe explained. Not just during my visits. My foundation is thorough in its due diligence. Miranda, watching her restaurant empire crumble before her eyes, made one final desperate appeal. Mr. King, please, I've devoted my life to Meridian. Whatever mistakes have been made, I can fix them. Just tell me what you want changed. Joe regarded her thoughtfully. The problem. Ms. Cole isn't specific practices but the underlying values. You've created a culture where appearance matters more than substance, where certain people are deemed valuable while others are treated as disposable. He gestured toward the dining room beyond the closed doors. Out there, you present an illusion of luxury and exclusivity, but it's built on exploitation, corner-cutting, and fundamental disrespect for those you consider beneath you. Miranda's shoulders slumped in defeat as the truth of his words sank in. Joe turned to address Melissa and Lorenzo directly. I believe in second chances, when they're deserved. Both of you have shown exceptional character under difficult circumstances. Melissa, he extended an envelope. The Culinary Institute called this morning to confirm your scholarship. The King Foundation will cover your full tuition and living expenses for the duration of the program. Melissa's eyes filled with tears as she accepted the envelope with trembling hands. I don't know how to thank you. Your kindness already has, Joe assured her. Compassion that remains consistent, regardless of who's receiving it, is increasingly rare. The culinary world needs more people with your values. Next, he turned to Lorenzo. Chef Bennett, the foundation would like to discuss a partnership opportunity with you. One of Joe's assistants handed Lorenzo a folder containing architectural renderings of a restaurant space. This property in Riverfront Park has been vacant for some time. The foundation is prepared to renovate it according to your specifications and establish you as majority owner with a 70% stake. Lorenzo stared at the plans in disbelief. This is exactly what I described to you. A community-focused restaurant with a training program for young chefs. Your vision impressed me, Joe acknowledged, as did your commitment to quality despite the pressure to compromise. The foundation will provide initial capital and business support, but the concept and execution will be entirely yours. Lorenzo struggled to find words. Mr. King, I don't know what to say. This opportunity, combined with Emma's surgery, it's more than I ever hoped for. You've earned it, Joe assured him simply. Throughout this exchange, Miranda and Victor had watched in stunned silence. Now, as the full implications became clear, Victor's face contorted with rage. "This is insane," he exploded. "You're giving everything to them while destroying our careers? Because we didn't kiss up to some old man in rags? This has to be illegal." Joe regarded him calmly. "Nothing illegal about a majority shareholder making personnel changes, Mr. Thompson. As for your career, I suggest you use this as an opportunity for reflection. Success built on cruelty and prejudice is ultimately unsustainable." Victor stormed out, slamming the door behind him. Miranda, left alone to face the consequences, attempted one final negotiation. "What happens to me in all this? Is my career over as well?" "That depends on you," Joe replied evenly. "The Foundation believes in redemption as much as consequences. You'll retain 15% ownership of Meridian, but as a silent partner only. The restaurant will close for 3 months for complete restructuring, new management retraining, and a revised business model that balances profitability with ethical practices." He handed her a business card. "My assistant will contact you tomorrow to discuss transition details. I suggest you use the closure period to consider what kind of legacy you truly want to build." With that, Joe signaled to his team that the meeting was concluded. As they prepared to leave, he paused beside Melissa and Lorenzo. "Remember," he told them quietly, "true wealth isn't what you accumulate, but what you give. Your value was never determined by this place or these people. It was within you all along." As Joe walked through the main dining room toward the exit, the staff and customers fell silent, watching in amazement as the shabby old man they had dismissed was revealed to be one of the most powerful businessmen in the country. He nodded politely to the stunned maitre d', left a generous tip for the coat check attendant who had previously ignored him, and stepped out into the night. Not as old Joe in tattered clothes, but as Joseph King Sr., a man whose simple disguise had revealed the truth about Meridian and everyone in it. The news spread through the city's restaurant community like wildfire. Overnight, Meridian went from being the pinnacle of fine dining to the center of a scandal that fascinated the culinary world. Food blogs and social media accounts buzzed with different versions of the story, each more dramatic than the last. The common thread in every telling was the same. A billionaire had exposed the ugly truth beneath the restaurant's glittering facade by posing as a poor old black man. For the staff of Meridian, the morning after brought a mixture of anxiety and hope. They gathered in the dining room, which felt strangely quiet without the usual pre-service bustle. A team of professionals from the King Foundation stood at the front, clipboards in hand. "Good morning," the lead representative began. "As you may have heard, ownership of Meridian has changed. The restaurant will close for 3 months for restructuring and retraining. However, Mr. King has made it clear that this transition should not cause unnecessary hardship for staff members." Murmurs rippled through the assembled employees. "All staff, except those specifically named for termination, will receive full wages during the closure period. Additionally, any tips that were skimmed by management over the past year have been calculated based on financial records and will be reimbursed in full." Gasps and exclamations of disbelief filled the room. For many of the servers who had suffered under Victor's tip theft, this represented thousands of dollars they'd given up hope of ever seeing. When Meridian reopens, it will operate under a new management structure and a revised business model. Those who wish to remain with the restaurant will undergo retraining. Those who prefer to seek employment elsewhere will receive assistance, with placement and references. As the meeting continued, Miranda watched from the doorway of her office, her face a mask of controlled emotion. In the harsh morning light, she looked older, the carefully maintained facade of perfection beginning to crack. When the Foundation representative finished addressing the staff, he approached her with a folder. "Ms. Cole, if you'll sign these papers, we can begin the transition process." Miranda took the folder with stiff fingers. "And if I refuse?" "The majority ownership has already been transferred. These documents merely outline your options as a minority shareholder. Mr. King was quite insistent that you be given the choice to remain involved, albeit in a reduced capacity." She glanced through the papers, her eyes widening at certain clauses. "This says I'll have no operational control." "That's correct. Your role would be strictly financial. Alternatively, you can sell your remaining shares to the foundation at market value. Miranda's hand trembled slightly as she signed the papers. I built this place from nothing, she said quietly. Everything I have is tied up in it. The representative's expression softened slightly. Mr. King recognizes your business acumen, Ms. Cole. He believes your talents could be better directed. There's a note for you on the final page. Miranda flipped to the last page and found a handwritten note from Joseph King Sr. True success isn't measured by wealth or status, but by the positive impact we have on others. Consider this an opportunity to rebuild with a stronger foundation. Across town, Victor Thompson stormed into his apartment, slamming the door behind him. He threw his severance envelope onto the kitchen counter without opening it. His phone had been buzzing constantly with messages from friends and colleagues who had already heard about the previous night's events. He ignored them all, pouring himself a large whiskey instead. The humiliation burned worse than the alcohol. After years of carefully cultivating relationships with wealthy clients and influential industry figures, his reputation had been destroyed in a single evening. Victor pulled out his phone and began calling contacts at other high-end restaurants, hoping to secure a position before word of his termination spread too widely. The first call went to voicemail, so did the second. On the third call, the manager of a popular steakhouse answered but grew noticeably cooler when Victor identified himself. Sorry, Thompson. We're fully staffed at the moment. You were hiring last week, Victor pressed. I saw the listing. An uncomfortable pause followed. Look, we've heard what happened at Meridian. King Enterprises has a lot of influence in this town. Maybe try something in another city. One by one, doors closed. By evening, Victor had exhausted his list of contacts. No one was willing to hire the man who had publicly insulted Joseph King Sr. with racist comments. His carefully constructed career was collapsing around him. Meanwhile, in a hospital room across the city, Lorenzo sat beside his daughter Emma's bed, reading her a story. The 8-year-old's face lit up with each character's voice her father created, her illness momentarily forgotten in the joy of the tale. A knock at the door interrupted them. A distinguished older man in a white coat entered, followed by a nurse carrying a tablet. Chef Bennett? I'm Dr. Richardson, the King Foundation, arranged for me to consult on Emma's case. Lorenzo stood to shake the doctor's hand. Thank you for seeing us. We've been waiting for this surgery for so long. Dr. Richardson reviewed Emma's chart on the tablet. I've studied her records. The procedure she needs is complex but has excellent outcomes when performed properly. I'd like to schedule her for next Tuesday. My team will perform the operation at no cost to your family. Next Tuesday? Lorenzo repeated in disbelief. We were told it would be months before she could get on the schedule. The foundation has made certain arrangements, Dr. Richardson explained diplomatically. Emma's case is now a priority. After discussing the details of the procedure and recovery process, Dr. Richardson left them with an encouraging smile. Try not to worry too much, Chef. Your daughter is in good hands. When they were alone again, Emma looked up at her father with wise eyes that seemed too old for her young face. That nice old man from your restaurant did this, didn't he? The one you told me about? Lorenzo nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. You said he looked poor but talked like he knew everything about food, Emma continued thoughtfully. Mom always says you can't judge people by how they look. She paused. He must really like your cooking, Dad. Lorenzo laughed through the tears that threatened to spill over. I think he likes more than my cooking, sweetheart. I think he sees people for who they really are. Across the city, Melissa sat in her small apartment, staring at the scholarship letter from the Culinary Institute. The King Foundation had not only covered her tuition, but also provided a stipend for living expenses and supplies. She would begin classes the following month. Her phone buzzed with a text from Lorenzo. Emma's surgery scheduled for Tuesday. Dr. Richardson himself will do it. All covered by the foundation. Still can't believe this is happening. Melissa smiled as she typed. Her reply, amazing news. Give Emma a big hug from me. Can't wait to visit her after the surgery. As she set her phone down, Melissa's gaze fell on the news article open on her laptop. The headline read, "Billionaire Philanthropist Exposes Elite Restaurants' Discriminatory Practices." The story had gone viral, with social media users sharing their own experiences of discrimination in high-end establishments. Joseph King Sr. had declined all requests for interviews, but a statement from the King Foundation emphasized their commitment to creating ethical business environments where all people were treated with dignity, regardless of appearance or background. Melissa closed her laptop and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights. In a single week, her life had changed completely, from struggling server with fading dreams to scholarship recipient with a promising future. All because she had shown simple kindness to an old man in tattered clothes. The following morning, a closed for renovation sign appeared on Meridian's front door. Inside, crews began the process of physical transformation, removing some of the more ostentatious decorations in favor of a warmer, more welcoming aesthetic. Miranda watched from her car across the street, unable to bring herself to drive away. For 10 years, Meridian had been the center of her existence. She had sacrificed friendships, relationships, and ethical boundaries to build it into a temple of exclusivity. Now, in a matter of days, everything had changed. Her phone rang. The display showed, King Foundation. Ms. Cole, this is Sarah Williams, from Mr. King's office. He suggested you might be interested in a consulting position. Your experience with high-end restaurant operations could be valuable for our hospitality development program in underserved neighborhoods. Miranda's first instinct was to refuse. Consulting for community restaurants was a far cry from running Meridian. But as she watched workers removing the restaurant's pretentious gold signage, something shifted inside her. What exactly would this position entail? She asked carefully. Helping local entrepreneurs develop sustainable business plans for food service establishments in areas without access to quality dining options. The salary is competitive, and there's potential for equity in successful ventures. It wasn't Meridian. It wasn't the glamorous life she had built for herself, but it was a chance to use her skills without the constant pressure of maintaining appearances at any cost. I'll consider it, Miranda said finally. Can you send me the details? As weeks passed, the story of Joseph King Sr. and Meridian gradually faded from headlines, replaced by newer scandals and sensations. But its impact continued to ripple through the lives of those involved. Victor Thompson, unable to secure work in any respected restaurant in the city, eventually took a position as a server at an airport chain restaurant, the kind of establishment he had previously mocked. The irony wasn't lost on him as he forced smiles for hurried travelers who barely looked at his face, much less knew his name. Lorenzo spent every available moment at Emma's bedside during her recovery. The surgery had been successful, and her improvement was remarkable. During the long hours in the hospital, he had filled notebooks with ideas for his new restaurant, menu concepts, training programs, community engagement initiatives. Each day brought Emma closer to health, and Lorenzo closer to a dream he'd never thought possible. Melissa began her courses at the Culinary Institute, excelling in both technical skills and creative development. Her experience serving in a high-pressure environment gave her advantages over classmates who had never worked in professional kitchens. She approached each class with the same attention to detail she had brought to her tables at Meridian, but now that focus was directed toward her own growth, rather than someone else's experience. And the renovation of Meridian continued, its physical transformation mirroring the changes in the lives connected to it. The restaurant that had once been a symbol of exclusivity and pretension was being rebuilt as something entirely different, still excellent, still special, but grounded in values, beyond mere appearance and status. 6 months passed. Spring flowers bloomed across the city, bringing new life after a long winter. The newly renovated restaurant, now renamed King's Table, opened its doors with a mission statement proudly displayed at the entrance. Excellence in food and service for all who enter, regardless of appearance or status. The interior had been transformed. Though still elegant, the atmosphere was warmer and more welcoming. The tables were spaced more generously, the lighting softer, the acoustics designed for conversation rather than hushed reverence. Most significantly, the pricing structure had been revolutionized. Premium dishes remained for those who could afford them, but a substantial portion of the menu offered excellent food at accessible prices. Behind the scenes, the changes were even more dramatic. Staff received living wages plus benefits, eliminating the desperate dependence on tips that had fostered such toxic competition. A training program provided career advancement opportunities for everyone from dishwashers to servers, and one night each week, the restaurant operated as a community kitchen, serving high-quality meals to those who could not afford to dine out. The management team, personally selected by Joseph King Sr., emphasized character and ethics alongside culinary and service skills. Several former Meridian staff members had returned after retraining, grateful for the improved working conditions and renewed sense of purpose. Across town, in a sun-filled classroom at the Culinary Institute, Melissa demonstrated knife techniques for a group of visiting high school students from underserved neighborhoods. The outreach program, funded by the King Foundation, aimed to inspire young people to consider careers in culinary arts. The most important ingredient in any dish isn't something you can buy, she told the attentive teenagers. It's the care you put into it. That's what transforms food from mere sustenance into something meaningful. After the demonstration, she checked her phone and smiled at a message from Lorenzo. Emma's final checkup today. Doctor says she's completely recovered. Celebration dinner at my place tonight. Bring your appetite. Melissa texted back her acceptance before gathering her knives. In the 6 months since Meridian's closure, she and Lorenzo had developed a close friendship, supporting each other through their respective transitions. His new restaurant, Emma's Kitchen, was scheduled to open the following month, and Melissa had already agreed to intern there during her summer break from school. That evening, she arrived at Lorenzo's modest home, bearing a bottle of wine and a homemade dessert, a technical challenge from her pastry class that she'd perfected over several attempts. Emma answered the door, her face glowing with health. Melissa, Dad's in the kitchen pretending he's not nervous about you tasting his new recipes. Lorenzo appeared behind his daughter, wiping his hands on a kitchen towel. Don't listen to her. I'm not nervous at all about having a future master chef critique my cooking. The warmth between them had grown naturally over shared meals and conversations, bonding over their mutual experience of having their lives transformed by a chance encounter with Joseph King Sr. As they enjoyed dinner, Lorenzo shared updates about his new restaurant. The training program has 10 students enrolled already. Former foster care kids, people recovering from addiction, veterans transitioning to civilian life, all of them passionate about food, but lacking traditional opportunities. That's amazing, Melissa said sincerely. How's the renovation coming along? Almost finished. The King Foundation team is incredibly efficient. They've incorporated every element I asked for, even my crazy idea about the open demonstration. Kitchen where guests can learn cooking techniques while they dine. Emma, who had been quietly eating her dinner, suddenly asked, Have you seen Mr. King again? The one who helped us? Lorenzo and Melissa exchanged glances. Neither had personally encountered Joseph King Sr. since the night at Meridian, though. His influence remained present in their lives through the Foundation's ongoing support. Not directly, Lorenzo admitted, but his team checks in regularly about the restaurant progress. I heard he still goes around the city in disguise sometimes, Emma said matter-of-factly. My friend's mom works at the community center and she said an old man in simple clothes brought them a huge donation last week. Nobody knew who he was until later when the Foundation contacted them. Later that evening, after Emma had gone to bed, Lorenzo and Melissa sat on the small balcony of his apartment, sharing the last of the wine. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Joe hadn't walked into Meridian that night? Melissa asked. Lorenzo considered the question. Emma might still be waiting for her surgery. I'd definitely still be working for Miranda, compromising my standards a little more each day just to keep my job. And I would have lost my spot at the Culinary Institute, Melissa added. Probably still serving tables watching Victor steal my tips. It's strange how one person can change so many lives, Lorenzo mused. Not just through money, but through forcing us to confront who we really are. Across town, In a very different setting, Miranda Cole sat in a small community cafe she had helped develop in a neighborhood that had previously been a food desert. The modest establishment bore little resemblance to Meridian's opulence, but there was an authenticity to it that her former restaurant had lacked. The consulting position with the King Foundation had evolved into a full-time role as director of their community restaurant initiative. To her own surprise, Miranda had discovered a genuine satisfaction in using her business acumen to create sustainable food service models in underserved areas. The cafe where she sat was the third successful opening under her guidance. The owner, a local woman who had previously run an informal catering business from her home kitchen, had just received a small business award for entrepreneurship. Miranda's phone chimed with an email notification. Opening it, she found a brief message from Joseph King Sr.'s office. Mr. King would like to meet to discuss expanding the community restaurant program nationally. Are you available next Tuesday? Miranda felt a flutter of nervous anticipation. She had not faced Joseph King Sr. directly since the night he had revealed his identity at Meridian. Though they had communicated through his foundation team, this would be their first face-to-face meeting since her humbling. She typed a simple reply. I would welcome the opportunity to discuss expansion. Tuesday works well. As she set down her phone, Miranda glanced around the bustling cafe. Tables were filled with local residents enjoying good food at reasonable prices. Staff members moved efficiently, but without the frantic pressure she had once imposed at Meridian. There was laughter, conversation, community. For the first time in her career, Miranda realized she had helped create something of genuine value. Not just a status symbol or a profitable business, but a place that improved the lives of those it touched. The revelation was both uncomfortable and liberating. The following day, the paths of those connected to the Meridian story intersected once more. The King Foundation hosted a preview dinner at the soon-to-open Emma's Kitchen, bringing together community leaders, culinary professionals, and foundation partners. Lorenzo presided over the kitchen with confident humility, directing his newly trained staff with respect and clear guidance. Each dish that emerged represented his vision of accessible excellence, sophisticated flavors and techniques applied to ingredients that ordinary people could recognize and afford. Melissa, given the night off from her studies to attend the event, watched her friend with pride. She had contributed several ideas to the menu during development, and Lorenzo had graciously credited her input. Miranda arrived late, slipping into the dining room quietly. Though invited in her capacity as foundation director, she felt a lingering awkwardness about facing Lorenzo and Melissa. To her surprise, both greeted her with professional courtesy rather than resentment. The concept is remarkable, Miranda told Lorenzo sincerely. You've created something truly unique here. Thank you, Lorenzo replied. I've had excellent guidance. His eyes moved meaningfully to the entrance, where Joseph King Sr. had just arrived. No longer disguised as Old Joe, Joseph King Sr. presented an impressive figure in a well-tailored suit. Yet he carried himself with the same quiet dignity that had been evident even in his humble clothing. He moved through the room greeting guests, eventually making his way to where Lorenzo, Melissa, and Miranda stood. Chef Bennett, he said warmly, shaking Lorenzo's hand. The food is exceptional. Even better than I remembered from Meridian, now that it truly reflects your vision. Thank you, Mr. King, Lorenzo replied. None of this would exist without you. I merely provided opportunity, Joseph corrected gently. You provided the talent and character that made it worthwhile. He turned to Melissa. And how are your studies? Progressing, Ms. Gray? Extremely well, she answered with a genuine smile. I'm at the top of my class in both technique and theory. I'm not surprised, Joseph said. Your natural empathy gives you an advantage many chefs lack, the ability to truly consider the experience of those you serve. Finally, he acknowledged Miranda with a respectful nod. Ms. Cole, I've been following your work with the Community Restaurant Initiative. Most impressive. Miranda accepted the compliment with newfound humility. It's been educational. I've had to unlearn as much as I've learned. The most valuable growth often requires that, Joseph observed. As the evening progressed, Joseph circulated among the guests, eventually slipping away without fanfare. His characteristic preference for substance over ceremony unchanged despite the formal setting. The next morning, news outlets reported a remarkable anonymous donation to the city's homeless services department. Enough funding to create a culinary training program and small business incubator for people transitioning out of homelessness. And in a small park, across town, an elderly black man in simple, clean clothes sat playing chess with a group of veterans. A young woman approached hesitantly, carrying a paper bag. "Excuse me," she said. "Are you Joseph King?" The old man smiled gently. "Just Joe. To my friends here. I work at Emma's Kitchen," she explained. "Chef Bennett asked me to bring you this." She handed him the bag, which contained a carefully packed meal from the restaurant's menu. "Very kind of him," Joe said. "Would you like to join us for a game? While I enjoy this excellent food?" The young woman hesitated, then sat down at the chess table. "I should warn you, I'm not very good." "That's perfectly all right," Joe assured her. "We all start somewhere. It's the willingness to learn that matters most." As they set up the chess pieces, a businessman in an expensive suit walked past, barely glancing at the group of seemingly ordinary people engaged in their simple game. Joe watched him pass with the same observant eyes that had once assessed Meridian's culture of exclusivity and found it wanting. "Sometimes," Joe remarked to his new chess partner, "the richest souls wear the poorest clothes. And sometimes, those with the most to offer go unnoticed because others are too busy looking in the wrong places." He moved his first chess piece with the same deliberate care he had shown in transforming the lives of those who had crossed his path. Not through grand gestures alone, but through the profound impact of seeing people for who they truly were, beneath whatever disguises they wore, whether of poverty or pretension. Have you ever wondered what the world might see if your true character was put to the test when no one important was watching? The way we treat those we think can't benefit us reveals everything about who we really are. If this story touched your heart, please like, subscribe, and share for more powerful narratives that challenge us to look deeper. Your support helps these stories reach those who need them most.